For the past 30 years or so, Stephen Cohen has been one of the foremost scholars and critics of American Jewish life. The author of numerous books and innumerable articles, he is currently a research professor at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion and the director of the Berman Jewish Policy Archive at Stanford University. For his contributions to American Jewish life, Stephen has been named one of the Forward 50 more than once. He has been awarded an honorary doctorate. From his peers, he has been recognized with the Marshall Sclair Award of the Association for the Social Scientific Study of Jewry, as well as a National Jewish Book Award.
Co-written by Gelman.
I was a co-author of that book, too. As a scholar, Stephen's contributions to our understanding of American Jews is immeasurable, and I can't imagine doing the work that I do without his work preceding me. His work with Charles Liebman broke new ground in framing American Jewish life, and his book with Arnie Eisen, The Jew Within, from 2000, remains a towering achievement in the social scientific study of American Jewry. His other work is similarly as informative and impressive, and his list of published articles and research stretches on for pages and spans studies of families and schools, summer camps and synagogues, young Jews, old Jews, religious Jews, Jews on the East Coast, Jews on the West Coast, secular Jews, Jews who love Israel, and Jews who do not. But my relationship with Stephen is more than academic, as they say. I met him in 2004, 2005, I don't remember, and we immediately got to work. My job at the time on my project with Stephen was to go to cultural events and parties thrown by Jews in their 20s in New York. I was at the time a Jew in my 20s in New York. And I would call Stephen with my field notes or my interview transcripts, and Stephen would respond with demographic data that he could recall basically by memory. And reports of attitudes and behaviors that helped either make sense of the things that I was seeing or make less sense of what I saw. It was, as they say, the beginning of what became a really great and productive partnership. And during the next couple of years, we worked very closely together on a few different projects. And Stephen, during those years, took me under his wing and really taught me to do the work that I do now and the work that I teach our students to do. And so then we took our work on the road, speaking to Federation leadership, to rooms of philanthropists, to Jewish communal leaders, and to our academic colleagues. And during those talks, I learned from those many, many evenings how to speak to people who not only cared about what I had to say, but who also cared passionately about the Jewish people. And I learned how to do that primarily by listening to Stephen represent our work much better than I ever could have at the time, often sharing news with them that they did not want to hear. But they listened, and more importantly, they engaged in very active conversations of him and me. And most of the time, I just sat there and listened and let Steve do all of the heavy lifting, and I learned a great deal. I learned that Stephen could speak with sensitivity to these audiences because he is one of them. He's a passionate champion of the Jewish people whose passion for the Jewish people is matched only by his keen sense, his keen observational sense. And this comes across in his scholarship, as well as his prolific work as a Jewish public intellectual, where he is a fearless defender and critic of American Jews and of the State of Israel. It comes across in the diversity of his scholarship and the wide audiences he is able to reach. It comes across in the passion with which he speaks about American Jewish life and his willingness to engage in discussion and debate, specifically with people who don't agree with him. His very public persona and his regular engagement in communal discourse have made him something of a lightning rod for criticism, which is a form of conversation in which Stephen, growing up as a Jew in Queens, takes great comfort, Brooklyn, I'm sorry, I thought it was Queens. Having grown up as a Jew in Brooklyn, takes great comfort and even pleasure. And I'm certain, though we are quite far from Brooklyn at the moment, that we'll indulge him and make him feel welcome. Following Stephen's remarks, Professor Tomás Jiménez from the Sociology department will join him in conversation for as long as the rest of us can hold our tongues. So it's my pleasure to welcome to Stanford my friend and teacher, my mentor, Stephen Cohen.
I'm not that good. So, but Ari, seriously, that was really gorgeous. Thank you so much. I'm moved by it, and the only parts I would dispute is this. I would add is that the mentoring relationship was two-sided and not, as you portrayed it, one-sided. But thank you so much for really, really lovely words. And I'm serious, like, if I can have a copy so I can give it to my daughter, I really would. Lee said hesped, which means eulogy. So I'm gonna let Marion know that you're on the list, and bis 120 Jahre until 120 years, you got the job. So thank you very much. I want to make I hope an interesting argument today. The argument will be that Jews have been exceptional as a religious and ethnic group in America. That's one of the points. The second is that there are good reasons for Jewish exceptionalism, and I'll try to talk briefly about that. And the third is that exceptionalism as an extraordinary, cohesive, and an active and a highly identified group is not coming to an end, is diminishing considerably. So that's really basically what I want to say. Now let me try to lay that out. First of all, certainly if we were having this conversation in the 1970s, 1980s, and someone asked, how are the Jews doing? I said, well, they're politically highly mobilized and highly organized. They have this tremendous lobby on behalf of Israel. They're in the midst of doing something which, you would never believe. They've made the freedom of Soviet Jewry an international issue, moving the two great superpowers of the world and actually achieving their objectives. And they have this vast institutional structure. I mean, synagogues, yeah, they got synagogues, but they got Jewish federations and philanthropy. They have political groups. They have Jewish community centers. They have more types of Jewish institutions than anybody else. There isn't an American Methodist Committee. There isn't the American Lutheran Congress. I mean, the Jews have an American Jewish Committee, have American Jewish Congress. They have the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council. They have lots of major Jewish organizations, some of which really are major, some which are not. But there's B'nai B'rith, there's Hadassah. There's this vast structure, and they have, compared to other white European ethnic groups, they have an extraordinarily low rate of intermarriage. By the way, 1970, roughly 22% of Jews marrying non-Jews. That really was quite low. And one more thing, they're pretty rich. I mean, they're the most affluent group of their size in America, which they would continue to be until the Indians came, the Indians from India, who were a self-selected migration group. But in terms of third generation groups, they're the most affluent, most highly educated. Lots of Nobel Prize winners, lots of people in positions of influence and power, and Hollywood and all. It was a great story of Jewish life. Now, the question is, why did the Jews? Why the Jews, as some people ask? Why were the Jews able to be so cohesive, so successful, so prominent, so affluent? All these things. There are side stories too. I remember someone wrote about Stanford Garelick, the New York City police commissioner, that he's living proof that not all Jews are smart. All right, but there was some of that, But aside from Stanford Garelick, this is a fairly extraordinary. By the way, I really hope that there are no Garelicks in the audience right now. This is simply an available, example. So why were Jews so, extraordinary, so different than other Americans? And really, the Irish showed up, the Germans showed up, the Italians showed up, Lutherans arrived. There's all these. So I'm thinking about that, and there are several reasons. One was offered by Nathan Glazer in his book American Judaism, published in 1957, and he said Jews are the one religio-ethnic group in America this genuinely combines religion with ethnicity. You have Mexican Americans who are Catholic. You have Lutherans who could be heavily German, but that's not the same. It's that the twin sources of identity, of ethnicity and religion, go hand in hand. They're part of a double helix. And he wrote that No other religion, worries about its ethnic component the way the Jews do. Marshall Sclair would write about the conservative synagogue, which was like the major synagogue at the time, the major in terms of affiliation, that it's really an ethnic church. It's an ethnicity masquerading as a religion, because that America says you should be religious. The Jews say, yeah, we're religious, but really underneath that, they're an ethnos, which means that they're a people. Secondly, we have to look at their pre-American backgrounds. Irish immigrants were Irish. I mean, they were like Irish peasants who, left and fled. Jews, they were a separate, really a fully separate, autonomous community, living with a separate existence in Europe, predominantly, with strong cohesive ties, with numerous institutions, with essentially self-government in Europe for many years, and with a group survivalist ideology. Like it was important to stay Jewish, and no Irish or Italian farmer had to worry about, well, will I stay Italian? Will my kids marry Italians? Will they still speak Italian when they're growing up? No one worried about it. It's like you are who you are. Jews actually worried about these things, and they had another advantage. They were persecuted. They were excluded. When you do modern European history, you talk about the Enlightenment. And when I took my class on European Jewish history, modern Jewish history, it was the Enlightenment and the Emancipation. So Europeans were enlightened. Jews were enlightened and emancipated. What does that mean? Before they were emancipated, they were separated. They were socially segregated. And Europe had to figure out what to do with its goddamn Jews. They had to release them, and then Jews wanted in. Europe wasn't sure. The conservatives said, "Look, keep them out until they can get their act together." And liberals said, "No, bring them in, and then they'll assimilate." But Jews were presented a real problem for Europe. There really was a Judenfrage, a Jewish question for Europe, and Jews knew this. I mean, they knew that they were on the other side of emancipation, the other side of the ghetto wall. And ghetto wall wasn't just a ghetto wall; it was a social wall. And then they come to America, and in addition to have everything else, this culture of separation and segregation continues in America, which is tough if you're my father growing up the Lower East Side, and you are beating up and being beaten up by Irish Catholic kids in your neighborhood, which is a story that my father would tell me many times, because he was Jewish. I'm sure there were some people who were beaten up because they were Italian, or vice versa. But there was no question that Jews were a separate group. I remember my bar mitzvah when I was in 1963. So I was born in 1950, and I think my parents had these 10 tables, for relatives and friends, or maybe 20 tables. I have no idea exactly how many. But I did know this. I do remember this. There was one table for the Gentile customers of my father. My father was a fur cleaner, and he had these Gentile customers. And they all sat in their own table, and then there were all the Jews, all the family and friends. And it was Jews and, pardon the expression, and the Goyim. That was my growing up. And on Parkside Avenue in Brooklyn, I went to PS 92, and I would say that PS 92 was more Jewish than most Salma Schechter day schools are today. We had 36 kids in the class, 33 of whom were Jewish, and 3 were Jewish wannabes. And it was, and so we led this. My idea of a Jewish organization was, the first idea I had was it's a Democratic Party of Brooklyn. That was a Jewish organization, and even George Sankara, Italian, who was my local assemblyman, belonged to my synagogue, because that was what people did in those places. So, even the Italians were Jewish. So, this is the world that was, and the world has changed. But this is a very, very powerful ethnic group that had a history of cohesiveness, and had a history of social separation, comes to America, maintains cohesiveness, and is still subject to social separation, as I was indicating. In 1964, there was a study done by NRC, National Opinion Research Center, on ethnic prestige, whatever. Jews were the lowest ranking white ethnic group in the study. I'm competing with Portuguese. I'm not sure who was, they're either lowest or next to lowest, but they were the lowest ranking white ethnic group. And to turn the story many years forward, in 2009, Robert Putnam publishes American Grace and finds that Jews are the highest ranking religious group in America. In other words, like a study done of Americans, that means 2% of Jews, 90% of respondents are not Jewish. Jews are more admired than the Protestants themselves, than the Episcopalians. So they've moved from lowest ranking ethnic group to highest ranking religious group, which is part of the story. So now we move to the current era, and then I'm going to skip over lots of history, and ask you, well, so what's happening today? There's still a lot of those signs of ethnic and religious achievement that Jews maintained over the years, but we're seeing significant demographic changes in the size and constitution of American Jewry. And in order to tell you about this, I need to have you allow me to divide the Jews into three. Those who are internal to this conversation, I assure you it's not about Cohen, Levi, and Yisrael, priest, assistant priests, and ordinary commoner, which are religious statuses within Judaism. The Cohens are actually the most favored class of people. We're supposed to have a certain intelligence above and beyond others, but I don't know. Just reporting as a good academic has to reveal all the facts. Anyway, no, I'm talking about another tripartite division. One group will be the Orthodox, who come in a variety of varieties. Another group, I don't have a good name for, partially Jewish, nominally Jewish, episodically Jewish, indicative of Jews of no religion, but let's call them unengaged Jews. And then there's another group called that are engaged Jews who are non-Orthodox, everything other than the Orthodox. So the story about this group, this curve, is as follows. First of all, let's start with the Orthodox. The Orthodox represent about 10% of American Jewish adults, and yet they represent 27% of Jewish children and 35% of Jewish children under the age of 5. In other words, there's evidence that they're growing and everyone else is declining. That's going to be part of the story. Now, the reasons for Orthodox growth are several, one of which is high fertility. Women who are Orthodox have on average 4.1 children. If they're Hasidic, it can go up as 5.9. The Litvish Haredi, which are not Hasidic, black hat yeshiva Orthodox Jews, known as ultra-Orthodox Jews, are around 5.2. The modern Orthodox are around 2.5. Overall, about 4.1. So one thing is that they have lots of kids. Secondly, they almost universally marry. This may sound to some of you like, yeah, so? What are you talking about? But because if you're my age, you go, yeah, people marry. But if you're my age, you also know that you have 35-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 45-year-olds, and some of them are not married. So you go, oh yeah, that's changed. And that's changed for most Americans, for most Jews, but not for the Orthodox, where there's very, very high marriage rates. I was once twice approached by Haredi Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox people, and they wanted me to do a study because they have a marriage crisis. And what's the marriage crisis? They have a lot of women who have trouble finding grooms. So I listened for a while. I said, your average groom gets married at 23. Your average bride is 20. It turns out that your population is expanding. And it turns out that in that case, the younger spouse can't find, because the population is expanding, that when she looks to someone 3 years her senior, she finds fewer grooms to marry. And when you're playing with the edges, there's, it could be 4 or 6 whatever extra wives floating around, or potential, single women floating around, because the population keeps expanding. In New York, when I did a study of the New York area Jews, we had 370,000 Orthodox Jews in the 8-county area in 2002, and 493,000 in 2011. Huge increase. And I think we're talking about a doubling of the population within every 20 years. So not only is there high marriage and high fertility, the other thing is that there is young marriage. And young marriage means people, this whole process gets moving a lot faster. And there are many Orthodox people who are great-grandparents. It's a new and emerging phenomenon. And the most extreme is Rav Shach, who was a great Talmud scholar who passed away in Israel a few years ago, over 100, 106, whatever. And the newspapers reported that he had 1,400 descendants at his funeral. They all came. So, and you can say, well, I can't be. Just do the math. 10 times 10 times 10 times, then you're there. It's not a problem. Yeah, the only problem was Hanukkah guilt. Like, how does he give a Hanukkah gift to all of his great-grandchildren? And then, he had a whole department. One was called Yossi, and the other was Sarah, and the other was David. And they would have these, and you can give out 72 David gifts or whatever, but that doesn't matter. So the Orthodox are really, really, really growing. And the last thing about that I want to tell you is that the Orthodox used to shed. People didn't stay Orthodox. Everybody Jewish leaders in 1950 knew that the Orthodox were disappearing. So Ben Gurion knew they were disappearing, and just leave them alone. They don't want to stay in the army. It's fine. They're going to disappear anyway. We can give them a pass. And Orthodox rabbinical students knew they were disappearing, so they studied at the conservative synagogue, the conservative seminary, Jewish Theological Seminary, because there was not going to be Orthodox congregations in 15, 20, 30 years. Might as well get a conservative rabbinical degree and then go serve in conservative congregations. So everyone assumed the Orthodox were disappearing in 1950. But as I said, they turned that around, and they are growing right now by leaps and bounds. But the reason that we're disappearing is that everybody who was raised Orthodox was becoming non-Orthodox. Technically, I guess I was raised Orthodox. I was in an Orthodox synagogue, except we ate non-kosher food out. My father and I would go to synagogue in the morning, and in the afternoon, my mother would go shopping. My father would go play pinochle at the Jewish War Veterans, and I'd go play football. And this was an Orthodox home. And no surprise, I didn't stay Orthodox. I changed, and Orthodoxy changed. And this was, and the vast majority of people like me were raised Orthodox. Left Orthodoxy. My wife, Rabbi Marian Lev Cohen, she really was raised Orthodox and went to Ramaz Yeshiva. She's now a Reform rabbi. So that was typical of that period. Today, the departure rate is about 20%. Fell from 70, 80%, now down to 20%. With each generation, it fell. So there's an 80% retention rate. If you've got 4 children and all this stuff, you keep the population, and it keeps expanding. So Orthodoxy managed to increase its retention rate by virtue of raising the bar, more cohesive communities, much higher rates of day school and yeshivas, and of course, and study in Israel, and also maneuvering within the American democracy to obtain significant government support for their communities, which they continue to do. Orthodoxy. Everybody else. Okay, so you got that picture? It's possible? Everybody else. Everybody else. Non-Orthodox Jews are having a fertility rate of around 1.7, which is standard for middle-class white Americans, and maybe even middle-class Americans. They also have, unlike the Orthodox, they also have significantly delayed or even non-marriage. I looked at non-Orthodox Jews in their 40s, and only 82% had been married. 18% were not, it's huge, 18% were non-married. In addition, their marriage patterns are strikingly in the direction of marrying non-Jews. And I'll explain the consequences of that, but let's understand what we're talking about here, that of non-Orthodox Jews today who recently married, 72% married non-Jews. 40% among conservative Jews, 80% among Reform-raised Jews, and 80%, or give or take, among non-denominational Jews. This is a growing category. So the vast majority of Jews who are not Orthodox marry non-Jews and then go on to have only, as a group, 1.7 children. Now, it turns out that the children of the intermarried are split between Jews and non-Jews. The percentage who are being raised or who grow up to think of themselves as Jews actually has gone up, and actually it is now past, it's now up to 59-60%. But I'll get to this in a second. At 59-60%, actually, intermarriage grows the Jewish population, provided you have enough fertility. But let's assume the fertility is at 2.1. 59-60% means you grow the population. And the reason is that if you have two Jews who marry each other, you have a Jewish family. But you use up two Jews when they marry each other. Now, if a Jew marries a non-Jew, then in each marriage you only use up one Jew at a time. So you only need half the litters to be Jewish to stay even. If half stays even, 59-60% is good news. So indeed, there has been an expansion of the Jewish population, not primarily because of this, primarily because of the growth of the Orthodox, because of the arrival of the Russians, and because of longevity, which is a whole other issue, but Jews 65 and over are intellectually active and prominent and giving lectures and doing all kinds of wonderful things, and they're living much longer, and they think that and they have good reason to believe that they'll survive. But actually, there's been a huge increase in the number of Jews 75 and over. So that's another reason the population has grown, but it's also grown in the interim because of the children of the intermarriage. But it turns out that these children have weaker, on the whole, Jewish identification. And when asked, only a half say that my religion is Jewish, and the other half say it's nothing. I'm not against secular Jews. I consider myself a secular, moderately observant Jew. Some of my best friends are secular. My son-in-law is secular. It's fine. But Jews with no religion in America, and using the Pew terminology, it really is associated with weaker levels of Jewish identity. Jews of no religion, when they raise children, raise 2/3 of their children as non-Jews, not just like not very Jewish, as non-Jews. And among the grandchildren, and we have recent data, among the grandchildren of the intermarried, only about 7 to 9% are being raised as Jews by religion. So what I believe is happening is we're going to have a temporary bulge in the population followed by a sharp decrease. And in any event, we have people who are intermarried, who are the children of the intermarried, who are highly inactive in Jewish life, and that is reducing the number. And this is the point. That's reducing the number, helping to reduce the number of active Jews. And here's the result. Among people in my generation, more or less, people aged 50 to 69 who are not Orthodox, let's put the Orthodox aside, of non-Orthodox, there is 1.8 million of us. Of people 30 to 49, there's about 1.2 million of us. The percentages of those in the younger generation who are in any way active in Jewish life, and you can measure it by feeling, how important is being Jewish to you, belonging, action, informal association. These are the kind of the four ways in which we measure such things: subjective identification, informal association, practice, and formal association. On all those measures, the younger generation is less active than the older generation. And you put the two together, and basically, you give me a measure, and I'll say half. How many Jews, 50 to 69, think that being Jewish is important to them? X, whatever, 600,000. Among the younger generation, 300,000, whatever the number is. Synagogue. Care about Israel, care about Israel. Organization. Any donor. Half. So we are now in the midst of a significant population decline of what I call active Jews in the Jewish middle. Middle because they're not Orthodox, and they're not inactive. They're active Jews, and those numbers are rapidly declining. As a result, what I'd like to say is, if my theory is correct, then what we should see are aging conservative synagogues, aging Reform synagogues, aging organizations like Hadassah and B'nai B'rith, aging profiles of Federation donors. We should see conservative synagogues closing up or merging with Reform temples. We should see the Reform movement and the conservative movement firing a lot of rabbis and others in their central agencies. We should see perhaps a 3% decline every year in the number of kids who are going to supplemental Jewish schools, which are congregational schools outside of Orthodoxy. We should see Salma Shechter schools, the conservative day schools, closing up. We should see these things happening if the theory of demographic decline of the active Jewish middle is true. And of course, we see all that. Everything I just mentioned is well documented, been reported in the news, and is part of what's happening right now. I see all this going on, and as Ari mentioned, part of what I try to do is to not just analyze, but to present policy prescriptions for American Jewry, which I feel like I can do now. And we're not going to go too far into this, but just basically the basic, and this may also relate to some of your work, the basic prevailing theory among Jewish practitioners and leaders is that we have failed to figure out a way to deliver compelling meaning to young Jews. And if only we could figure that out, young Jews would come back and would restock all these Jewish institutions and organizations. So it's a meaning-centered theory of change. Churches have been working on this for a long time, and they have the same complaints about their ineffective ministers and priests as we have about our rabbis and educators and Jewish leaders. If you go to Europe, you can actually go see lots and lots of empty church buildings, or church buildings that are being used as cafes, as cultural centers, museums, so forth and so on. They can't figure out what to do with them. They can't tear them down. They can't use them because people aren't going to church. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the former Archbishop, said that if we continue this way, there will be no Church of England in 25 years. Recent evidence from the Church of England, and they have evidence, indicates every single indicator of baptisms, funerals, members in the pews, all off 3%, 5%, 7%. They're all declined, as are the Presbyterians and all the others. So all liberal religious groups are in decline, and as we'll hear, and you'll add to this. And the other thing is, all American ethnic groups are also in the ways we measure such things also in decline. So it is not the case that Jews are a special circumstance of all of a sudden, kind of ethnic incompetence or religious relevance. This is not peculiar to the Jews. For the sake of the Jews, it's not. Unfortunately, it's a bigger issue. And so my policy prescription is let's not spend so much time on meaning. There's a lot of people trying to figure out meaning. That's our prevailing hypothesis. We should try. We should do our best. But let's think about policies which will create situations in which Jews have more social interaction with other Jews, because by virtue of that interaction, they will create Jewish communities for themselves, as well as for people who are parts of Jewish families, who themselves are not Jewish, but basically ought to be treated by Jews as if they are Jews, which gets me into a whole other controversial area. Anyway, so that's why I think Jewish exceptionalism is coming to a close. Jews are no longer exceptional. They're just like, more or less, they're just like other American liberal religious groups, and just like virtually all significant ethnic groups in proceeding down a path of I would say group dissolution, but group contraction, which will take us well into the middle of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
First I want to say thank you. So I often tell my graduate students that we do two things as academics. We learn stuff and we teach stuff. And so I think the highest compliment you can pay to someone is that you learned something from what they said, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot in the last half hour or so. And I did actually look up there. There are no notes on that lectern. I don't know how I aspire to be able to give that kind of talk. So what I think you'll find if you listen in to a conversation with Stephen and me, which you will today, is that we agree on a lot. And in fact, about 2 months ago, we rode up to the Jim Joseph Foundation where I gave a talk, and Lee Schulman was driving us. I will spare you the joke about the driver, and we could have let that drive last for several hours, I think, and would have kept jabbering the whole time. So I'm a sociologist. I study the very topics that Professor Cohen highlighted here, and I study them with different populations. I've primarily studied the Mexican origin population. Some of my current research looks at how established populations adjust when lots of immigrants live amongst them, kind of flipping the assimilation equation around. And I want to kind of touch on some of your comments from the perspective of someone who's worked on assimilation, which is a term I know you didn't use, and I don't know if that was intentional, but assimilation with a couple of other populations. There are ways in which Mexicans in the United States and Jews are similar, in that they are, in some ways, at least if you think about just their characteristics on the surface, an exceptional population. This came to light to me the very first time I taught my class when I was teaching at UC San Diego. I used to teach a class called Immigration and American Society. And I would talk about the definition of an ethnic group, the definition of a race group, and there would always be a couple of kids in the class who would say, well, I'm Jewish. What's up with that? Where do I fit into this definition? So the exceptionalism, as you pointed out, comes partly from this kind of overlapping concentric circles of being an ethnic group, a racial group in a pejorative sense, especially 100 years ago, but also a religious group, and a group that you could convert into. There is no other kind of ethnic, ethno-racial, ethno-religious group that one can convert into. In spite of some people's best efforts, you cannot convert to become Italian or Mexican and the like. So it's kind of an exception in the way that social scientists think about even just the mere categories that we think of as making up the American population. Mexicans similarly situated in this kind of exceptional way, at least on the face of it. So the origins of the Mexican origin population in the United States are not due to immigration, but due to conquest. We're sitting right now in a land that once was Mexico. And in fact, the entire American Southwest was Mexico, and when the United States annexed it in the middle part of the 19th century, the 100,000 or so Mexicans who were living in that territory all of a sudden became American citizens. Then there was about a 60-year period where that was virtually the only Mexican population in the United States. And then starting in 1910, you have this tremendous influx of Mexican immigrants. So it's a history of immigration, a history of colonization, and then not just a history of immigration, but a history of tremendously protracted immigration. Mexicans are colloquially non-white, but legally, when legal whiteness mattered a lot more than it does today, they were regarded as white, but treated as non-white. And so there were several desegregation cases in the middle part of the 20th century in Texas and even in Southern California, where Mexicans sued saying that they were going to segregated schools, and the courts came back and said, how can you go to segregated schools? You're all Mexican, but Mexicans are legally white, so it's an all-white school that you go to. So there's all kinds of ways in which they're exceptional, but also converging toward, in some ways, very similar patterns of assimilation, in that there are tremendously high intermarriage rates. And for Mexicans, in spite of the fact that the population is growing due to migration, the intermarriage rates in the fourth generation are around 50%, which is surprisingly high. There are patterns of intergenerational mobility. That is, the kids are doing better than their parents socioeconomically, not at the same rate that you would find among other populations, but you find it nonetheless. And this is in spite of the fact that there are exceptional populations in regards to these characteristics, but also in regards to the way that, in the Jewish case, non-Jews, in the Mexican case, non-Mexicans, perceive them as being so unassimilable. Say that 10 times really fast. So unassimilable, at least early on, and yet it's happening. So there are these tremendous parallels that I think are worth commenting on, and those parallels are worth commenting on not just because of the groups we study, but also because I think in many ways Jews and Mexicans are kind of a paradigm for a larger story of American assimilation, and this is maybe where I want to pick up on the second aspect of what I study, which is actually not so much how populations are dissolving. Maybe, I don't know if that's a word you'd accept for what you describe, but what that assimilation means for everyone else who's not a part of that group. What does that mean for the rest of us? What does that mean for the American character, the American mainstream? And if you are a concerned Jewish grandparent who's finding that your grandkids are all marrying non-Jews, or, take whatever group. If you are, a Vietnamese refugee and you're pulling your hair out because all your kids are marrying white kids, or if you're, this is the kind of right of every generation to complain that future generations are marrying the wrong kind of people, whether it's because they have a ponytail or drive a van, or it's because they're outside the group. That kind of intermarriage, that kind of dissolution, the dissolution of neighborhoods, of institutions, but of particularly intermarriage, might appear as loss to the populations from which this assimilation is occurring, but it can appear to gain to the rest of the population, right? So the mainstreaming of Jewishness, the idea that we live in a Judeo-Christian society is if you were to think about this, if you put this in the context of what has happened in the last 100 years, is remarkable. So there's a mainstreaming of these of particular identities, particular ways of eating, of talking, of humor that is common to the story of assimilation, which is so much emphasized in terms of loss. But as populations become part of a mainstream, they contribute something to that mainstream. And here I'm borrowing quite a bit from our mutual friend Richard Alba, right? The mainstream itself changes. So what can appear to loss to one group is gain to everyone else. Now that's a very rosy picture, but I think there's more than a kernel of truth, and certainly rings true in the work that I've done, which has been mostly in Silicon Valley, on people who are US born of US born parents, and these are people who are living, so these are not people who are part of what we call the post-65 immigration, this massive population of immigrants that have come in really the last 30 years, but people who are established. And how do they adjust in a context where their neighbors are changing, where the kids who their children go to school with don't look anything like the kids they went to school with, where their families are changing, where their sons and daughters-in-law are Brazilian and Mexican and Portuguese and Jewish. How does that change people's conception of the ethnic and racial norm? And to those people, there is a sense of loss, but also a sense of gain. And that is the story of American assimilation, a story that I think Jews and in many ways Mexicans are emblematic of. But that story of loss and gain is you'll also find among the kind of population to which all of these groups are supposedly assimilating, a sense that we've lost the way that we were, but we've gained something else. So maybe I'll just kind of leave it at that. I don't know if you, I had said maybe we do this like a jazz concert. We'll just riff back and forth, although I'm not a musician in any sense.
And neither am I, but your words are music to my ears.
Well,
and just to get into the rhythm of things, what I want to suggest that as you were speaking, I'll refer back to a conversation I had with in Steve Zipperstein's class. And Steve asked me to reflect on my persona as both, and Ari mentioned it too, both an analyst of Jewish life and actually a passionate insider.
Right.
And critic, but the critic and the insider reflects the same thing. As I'm listening to you saying, and you have this, I would say, neutral, analytic approach to loss and gain, and who loses and who gains. And I'm listening to this and going, yeah, I'm with you. I could play that. And the other part of me is I'm going, no, this loss is terrible. Mm-hmm. It's like my commitment to Jewish life, Jewish continuity, is not only deep personal commitment, as committed as a religious person is to God. I mean, it's really, for me, it's the same. The Jewish people is my God, and this God commands me and is normative and teaches me how to live my life and gives me purpose and meaning in life. I can just do the whole thing, except I'm a non-God believer, but I'm a Jewish people believer. So as I'm listening to you, and I'm saying I'm not, I'm representing that culture that I'm speaking. I'm saying no. This is a moral loss. This is not just an aesthetic loss. I would love to see in America that has many cultures and religions and percolating and much looking in a sense more like Canada than the United States. I would love that to be true for the good of America. I think it would be a much more interesting country. But within that, put that all aside, I listened to your conversation and I'm saddened because this is loss of what I regard to be as of ultimate importance in life, the preservation of a vital Jewish community that I'm watching weaken on my watch and thinking about my grandchildren and the future. So there is that other value or moral dimension, which you understand, right, but I suspect may separate us. And when I first met you a few weeks ago, I was taken by the extent to which you are so deeply invested intellectually and personally in the study of Mexican Americans, but the different stance that you take to group survival than I do. Right. And I'm fascinated by that interplay of the persona. And those are the thoughts that came into my mind as you were talking about gain and loss and so forth and so on.
Yeah, and I mean, if biography is the root of intellectual interest, this might be rooted partly in biography, right? So I'm the product of intermarriage. I made this joke when I gave the talk at Jim Joseph, so forgive me for those of you, Lee and Stephen, who've heard this, but if George Lopez, who's a Mexican-American comedian, says Mexicans will marry anyone. And so if you go to, maybe that fell a little flat here, but if you go to any big Mexican-American party, the ethnic and racial and class linguistic heterogeneity is tremendous, right? So I think that my biography teaches me this is just a fact of who we are, and so perhaps I lack that. On the one hand, I say I lack that same kind of commitment, but on the other hand, just to go back to biography, I married a woman who's also half Mexican. We're teaching our kids Spanish. They're going to go to a Spanish immersion school. We gave them very Latin names: Orlando, Ramon, Jiménez. The other one's sort of Marcelo, Oreste. It's French. I don't know. It just sounds romantic. We like it. But and I think among, so if you just go back, kind of continue with biography and just kind of how that's rooted in a larger people, I think there's a way in which the Mexican origin population, my other side of my family is Italian, and Italians, they had their own institutions and they had their own churches and their own political organizations, perhaps different in degree, if not kind, from what you described among American Jews. The stance, particularly in the first half of the 20th century, particularly for Mexicans, with these organizations existed to make Mexicans more American, more like the mainstream. And the second half of the 20th century, there was this kind of preservationist aspect to it as popular notions about the value of maintaining an ethnic identity switched. I sense that that's quite different about the institutions.
We had Americanization also, and the nice story to just illustrate that is if you go to New York to this very day, you'll see there are 2 Jewish hospitals on the east side of Manhattan. One Mount Sinai Hospital, which is on the Upper East Side, and one Beth Israel, which is just borders the Lower East Side. So you say, why do the Jews need 2 hospitals? What was going on? Mount Sinai was there first. And my grandparents, and then with my father and others, moved to the Lower East Side. My grandparents were so poor. How poor were they, Rodney? They were so poor that my grandparents would move every 3 months because there was a bonus. You used to get free rent for 3 months, then you have to start paying. So they would move for 3 months, then... Yeah. So those are the type of Jews who were there, and sometimes they would get sick. And what they would do is they get sick, they go to the Jewish hospital all the way up on the Upper East Side, Mount Sinai Hospital, which is the hospital for German Jews. And German Jews saw my grandparents coming up. They said, no. We'll build you a hospital. And they built them a hospital at Beth Israel on the east side, so they shouldn't go all the way up to the Upper East Side. What was that about? That was about Americanization. That was about, we're Americanized, not you, but we're going to give you settlement houses. We're going to teach you English. We're going to get you jobs. We're going to make you American and stop embarrassing us. Right? And in 1970, I led a sit-in. I was for 4 others. We led a sit-in at the New York Jewish Federation, basically protesting their assimilationist agenda. German Jews were still telling Russian Jews, you should become American. But there was a switch around that time, around the Six-Day War and going onward, and the assimilationist Americanist agenda actually had been achieved, and now you get to the 3rd and 4th generation American Jews, and we're not worried about that. And the current preoccupation of the Jewish community is, how do we keep our Jewish kids Jewish? Right. And everything gets twisted around that. I mean, to such an extent that it's like, let's do social justice, which is that's big, right? Social justice, so that our kids would learn the social justice that you can be Jewish and social justice. Let's do and people are instrumentalizing lots of good values in order to keep our kids Jewish. And I've done work on philanthropists, and that's going on. So we're now in a period of relative anxiety about the group future. No one's worried about Americanization, and it doesn't divide the community anymore. I would say, I just want to throw one other aspect that has to be part of this conversation that does differentiate Jews from other ethnic and religious groups, and that is Israel. Yeah. Ari and I could do this for a long time, but the basic story is that, as Ari and I reported in our work on distancing, that through 2010, 2011, the major feature of distancing of Jews from Israel, and Israel has been a major force in galvanizing Jews, has been intermarriage. That those with a non-Jewish parent or those married to a non-Jew scored lower on all measures of Israel commitment, more than, let's say, losing Passover Seder. Right. Why? Because Christians have Easter. Jews have Seder. Christians have churches. Jews have synagogues. Jews have Israel, and Christians have what? Like there's no direct parallel to the homeland, right? So that starting in 2012, give or take, 2011, 2012, 2013, certainly Gaza War, half of American Jews are liberal. Secular, democratic liberals in America, in general, have grown very disappointed with Israel, and they used to be, right, on the other side. And Jews are part of that secular democratic liberal group. And Jews who are liberal are especially unhappy with Israel, not just with its policies, but have, in a sense, turned away from Israel. So where does that leave us? The four foundations of Jewish group preservation are allegedly God, community, family, and Israel. God was a charade. Jews were never into God. They really were not. Let's put that aside. But it was a patina. Fine. Community, as I mentioned, Jewish commitments to organized community are really, they're shrinking. You can trace that. Family, intermarriage is making it impossible to think about in traditional familistic terms about being Jewish. And now you have Israel. So all the kind of the four pillars of Jewish cohesion are all being, in a sense, cut down. So, given by my analytic self and my moral self, this represents a compelling problem with me, and as my wife will tell you, it's really hard to get me to talk about other things, except other things once in a while. But it consumes me when I think about what I'm living through and what I'm seeing right now.
Let me make maybe just two quick comments, and then perhaps we should open it up to everyone else. Does that sound?
That'd be great.
Or does that sound good? Yeah. So there is a way in which Israel makes Jews quite exceptional in terms of American ethnic groups. There's a way in which it's not so exceptional, and here it is. So, in an age of mass migration and in an age where the kind of migrants who come here are highly selected, right, regardless of where they came from. The sending states are desperate to hang on to the flock that is left, right? And they're desperate partly because in many cases the migrants are, I don't know if I'm mixing metaphors here, maybe not, but they're the geese that lay the golden egg. At its height, Mexican immigrants were sending back $23 billion a year to Mexico as the second largest source of GDP after oil. And so the assimilation of the Mexican immigrant population was dangerous if you're the state of Mexico, if you're the nation state of Mexico. And so the Mexican government changed its tune in terms of how it treated its migrants abroad. Migrants for the better part of the 20th century were regarded as traitors, and now they're regarded as heroes. You have governors who come to James Logan High School. The governor of Jalisco goes to James Logan High School in the East Bay and gathers all the Jalisco hometown associations and calls them heroes, and Mexico is proud of you. And the idea is, don't forget about us, don't forget about us. But the fact is they are forgetting about them as generational progression happens. India is not so different. I mean, there's the history of the Israeli nation state is quite different, and so there are important details that differentiate. But the basic notion that the kind of homeland, however conceived, wants to hang on to its people abroad is fairly consistent. There was a second point I was going to make.
My friend Dory Gold, who is former UN ambassador and is now the director of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, will easily say that American Jews represent a strategic asset to the state of Israel.
Yeah, right.
And he sees this relationship as very, very important. Every once in a while, I lecture the foreign ministry about American Jews, and I tell them what trouble they're in. So that there's a parallel that's really, and there's Sheldon Adelson just invested a lot to organize Israeli Americans in America, in part in order to create a lobby on behalf of Israel. So what you're saying used to be financial, but now it's political. There's political capital that's expended here, and that's a very, very valuable point, that nations look to their American expatriates to do things on behalf
That's right.
of their country, and that's a very helpful way of looking at that.
And in fact, the former foreign minister of Mexico, Jorge Castañeda, said that he wanted...
You said that so well.
Jorge Castañeda...
I love hearing that.
Hablo español. Jorge Castañeda, I'll say it again, because maybe see if I can get more compliments, said that, this was over a decade ago now, said that he essentially wanted the Mexicans abroad to be to Mexico what Jewish Americans are to Israel. So it's also a kind of model. The second thing I'll say, and then maybe this is a good
Sure.
segue to open it up. The second thing I'll say is that, when I love the way you talked about your kind of analytical and moral selves and how there's a bit of competition between those two things, right? The facts as you read them and the facts as you feel them, right? And how you feel about the facts. And I wonder if that kind of represents, maybe not so much the sense of gain and loss, because I think you would see this as unequivocally a loss, right? But, it begs a question that intellectuals certainly have grappled with going back to the middle part of the 20th century, which is what is the right balance between fitting in, however you want to describe that, and maintaining some sense of group cohesion. Mm-hmm. Is there a right balance? How do we reconcile those things? Can you have one without the other, right? A lot of people would look, the Supreme Court has no Protestants on it. There are no Protestants on the Supreme Court. Everybody's either Jewish or Catholic, right? That's
not an IQ thing, is it?
I will not say. No, I don't know.
No, actually, no. I want to be very clear. I'm sorry I said that. Some of my best friends are Protestants.
So, do we become in some ways, regardless of how you identify, victims of your own success, right? If you're, if people are participating in mainstream politics, participating in mainstream organizations, they're bumping up against people who don't look like them, who don't practice the same religion, who didn't grow up eating the same foods, they fall in love, they get married. I think it's an open question. Can you have one without the other? That is, can you have integration selectively without having a kind of cultural loss that goes with it? I mean, I think it's an open question, but maybe one that we throw out to all of you, or other questions you might have, or comments.
The question, as I understood it, was a complex question. Was has Holocaust fatigue and ignorance of the Holocaust played a role in this decline, if I understood correctly? And basically, I'm going to say basically no. The decline is, and as Tomás just reminded us, the decline is, and as my talk said, is heavily propelled by demographic forces, by intermarriage, late marriage, low fertility, raising children as non-Jews as a result of intermarriage. Those have little to do with whether you really understand and respond to the messages of the Holocaust and what that means. It's just not it. That's not the question. And secondly, we have to know from the Pew study, which gave people a variety of symbols to respond to, not that the Holocaust was most important, but it was the one answer that was most widely recognized as essential to being Jewish by the population. So there really isn't a significant decline. The one difference that I would say that is, and you can feel it here and certainly in California, in that Jews continue and conventionally saw the world as more unfriendly than it really is. It's a feature of their ethnic identity. More Jewy Jews see the world as more anti-Semitic than less Jewy Jews. It's a technical term. You'll see it. And Sarah Silverman is actually the author of that term. She has a whole thing about Jewy Jews. You don't have Mexicans, right? You don't even have a term. It's okay.
We can figure one
out. I'll work on it. You make one up. Give it to Sarah Silverman, and we'll get it out there. And so, what you're talking about, there might be a relationship between Jews assimilating and Jews seeing the world as friendlier. And there could be a play off of one another. So there might be point. I just want to say that every once in a while, every 20 years, I write another article which says Jews are continue to overestimate the extent of anti-Jewish feelings out there. And I keep saying we make too much emphasis on anti-Semitism, although analytically I understand why Jews say that, but no one agrees that Jews are that disliked. Abba Eben once said about Jews, they're the one people who can't take yes for an answer.
Let me say one thing really quick, and I think I mentioned this to you in the car. We're talking, and this is somewhat meant to be insert some humor here, but also.
Is that like the Mexican joke about don't marry anybody?
No.
We heard that one.
That was
okay.
and it was terrible.
Yeah. It wasn't funny.
I was on. That's what I mean. It wasn't funny. It was a terrible joke. There are ways in which perhaps institutions are responding to the massive intermarriage rate. So I was going to a conference at Cornell, hosted by a demographer there who's Catholic, and his wife is Jewish. His wife's a woman named Sharon Sassler. His name is Dan Lichter. And we had dinner at their house. And on the way there, I'm looking through the catalog, the online catalog where you can buy, like zappers for your dog and, goofy things that you'll never need on these online shopping malls or whatever. And in there, this was during the holidays, was the Star of David Christmas tree topper for the interfaith couple. I actually thought this is an extraordinary recognition of a reality that you've described in a way in which people are kind of thinking about religious intermarriage in an ethnic term. Like, well, we can celebrate all of these things together. But anyway, so I just thought I could not go through this whole thing without mentioning the Star of David Christmas tree topper.
That's great.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
My things when you were talking about it were kind of things that I was throwing and then kind of thinking myself, okay, make Jewish school tuition free. Would I have sent my son to a Jewish school if it was tuition free? I probably still would have chosen the school I chose. So I'm not sure. So I asked a question, but I also have a partial reservation. The other thing I was thinking about the German Jews in the be a Jew inside, be whatever German outside. Not in a bad sense, but and the third thing is the whole how people lead their lives. I mean, what rituals they have, what they create for themselves as, to mark the rites of passage or the seasons or whatever it is. I have friends that are not Catholic anymore, but I mean, I go to their house and it has the decorations of the season. So it's also how do you get some kind of, because the Jews what do they do? I mean, they don't become, if they didn't convert and become Buddhists, well, not convert, but whatever, if they didn't become Buddhists, then what do they do? What are their rituals? And I count myself among them because I have no rituals. So I don't know, throwing.
I'll just pick up one thread, and that is like it behooves me to present just at least the outline. I'm not going to do it now, but the counter argument about having heard me talk. There are arguments that, well, maybe the data aren't right, maybe things will change. We've been growing. I want to dismiss those, but I want to give some credit, and that is that, well, okay, we're going to see the passage of this this collective and intensive form of Judaism, but as you mentioned about Catholics who are still some way Catholic, but being Jewish will take on new forms, will percolate out, and there'll be just an available culture that will be accessed even by individuals who are married to non-Jews or individuals who might have a Jewish grandparent, know that. And yes, so we lose the world I've described, but it morphs into something else. So I have a friend who's a rabbi who said he's concerned about preserving Jewish wisdom for the world. And Jewish wisdom for the world doesn't necessarily require high rates of group cohesion and institutions, the world that I'm imagining, and ritual practice or home practice, but it has, this thing could go on in other ways. So I just want to present that there's an alternate view, but it requires, in a sense, developing new measures of ethnic or religious group continuity, and it's an innovative approach. I happen not to buy into it, but I need to present it to be. Judy.
I wonder if anybody looked at the question of apparently increased anti-Semitism, both in this country and in Europe and others. What kind of impact does that have on Jewish community? Sometimes when you've got these kinds of incidents, it brings people together. And I don't know what's...
Was it Wilfred Pareto who said that groups under attack polarize? Those who identify with the group become more active, and those who... Is that right? You went to grad school?
I should know this.
I'm just citing it.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to grad school?
Harvard.
Yeah, they were okay. But,
HU, as
yeah,
Stanley was
I had Robert Merton was my teacher. But all right. Anyway, so it might be that the perception of anti-Semitism would take people who are less identified with being Jewish say, "Oh, I don't want this. Who needs this conflicted world?" That's part of it. I am, and I am. I don't believe that. I believe that there's more Jew hatred in Europe and other places, largely tied to the perception that Jews are, in a sense, connected to Israel, and that the Jew hatred and the Jew. Well, here's what we know. We know that there are many Jew hatred incidents, many more now than before, and surveys of the populations in Europe actually indicate low levels of anti-Semitism at the same time put together. And so what's happening is that Muslim minorities are attacking Jews and Jewish institutions, and the European populations think Jews are fine. Sweden, for example, has a high rate of Israel criticism and a low rate of anti-Semitism in the population. And again, when you find out that Jews in America, when you mention marriage, Jews are very popular marriage partners. The reason so many Jews can marry non-Jews is that so many non-Jews will marry Jews. So, and I'm saying that these arguments don't sway highly identified, especially right of center American Jews, but I'm highly identified, I'm not right of center, but they sway me. That we are not seeing a lot of anti-Semitism. We are seeing some Israel-related Jew hatred, which I don't regard as anti-Semitism. Jews are being hired. Jews are being, they still go to universities. They can buy any house they want. America is a much less anti-Semitic country than it was when I applied to Columbia College in 1966.
I wasn't asking about the anti-Semitism. I was wondering what the impact of the BDS movement. I don't know if anybody's looked at that in terms of Jewish identity.
The same, no one's looked at that, and I do know that there was one survey of perceptions of BDS, which we can talk about what that means, but Jewish students react according to their own template. So if they're highly identified, Israel-oriented Jews, they see BDS as being very antagonistic and they're very upsetting. If they're not so identified, they don't see much of it, and they're not as concerned. There's one other kind of basic lens through which Jews view the world. Insofar as Jews have enemies, conservative Jews, politically conservative Jews, think the enemies are on the left, and liberal Jews think their enemies are on the right. So there's a basic disconnect between when you get right-wing, left-wing Jews together. One side says Obama is the worst president ever existed, and the other side, no, he's the best president because he's actually doing what, he's stopping settlements. So there's a very, very different perception of what threat constitutes. This gentleman has been very, very patient, and I must tell you, I did not see hands in the back. It's not that I'm watching, but we've gotten a lot of questions from the front. But this gentleman really has been extremely patient, and usually when I talk, you get three guys who talk, and then I have to say, all right, gender diversity. I'm not going to call upon the gender that has already talked. You, on the other, in Stanford, everything is backwards. So, welcome to the conversation as a male. I appreciate you joining in and integrating the conversation so we all feel included. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your talk, and thank you for implied compliment when you took my call, my question. It seemed to me that what's missing from your discussion is a short discussion on what happens in Israel, because that affects Israel. This affects American Jews too. Mm-hmm. And essentially in Israel you see a greater percentage of Oriental Jews rather than European origin Jews. You see much more religiosity in the population in general, and you see much less liberalism as major trends. That's even not talking about the security situation at all. Just looking at that, you could understand the differences or the beginning disconnect between the Israeli community and the American community. And that's part of your story.
Yes. I think, honestly, I think you exaggerate, but not enough.
How would you maintain a Jewish identity 20 or 30 years into the future? Would you have to be Orthodox to maintain your identity?
In America or Israel, or
Jewish identity.
There is. Look, we know. As I think it was Yogi Berra who said the future is it's very hard to predict. Prophecy is very hard, especially about the future. But so
it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future.
Yeah, that's it. So there is. I wrote a piece for Commentary magazine a couple of months ago, and I said, "Oh, Commentary magazine asked me to write. I'll get them." So I wrote a piece which basically said, and nicely, but not so nice. You conservatives, you've put us on a disaster track. Here's what's going to happen: the Israeli state is going to go off the right-wing deep end. The left-wing Israelis, like my daughter and her husband, they'll leave. Right-wing will stay. Orthodox and other right-wing Americans will come. And Israel will align itself, will give up on America and Europe, and will align itself with the non-democratic countries of the world. And that's what we're going to see. Now, turns out there's a lot. Again, I say exaggerate, but not enough. There's a lot to be said for this. There is a spiral. It could be broken. But I can tell you that just this morning I had a conversation with an activist, left Zionist friend of mine, and along in the way he said, so-and-so from the major ministry in Israel said, yeah, we're losing Europe, we're losing America, we're gonna pivot towards India and China and South America, and I've been having wonderful conversations with some of the local Gulf state countries, the Sunni countries. I mean, this is like really happening right now. In American Jewry, Israel has never been as polarizing a force as it's been, with center and right of center going one direction. And I've been saying I've never seen such disillusionment among liberal, progressive, not so. Disillusion means I don't want to deal with it. Just leave me alone. Like some people are getting active. So there is a scenario. It's not. I would say it's not probable, but it's highly possible. It's only a scenario that this scenario will move in that direction. And when I said jokingly that you exaggerate, but not enough, I happen to be sitting on some data about Israel, and I was surprised at how nationalist, anti-democratic, and religious the society is. Well, they all go together. Religious, nationalist, and anti-democratic, so the population is moving in this direction. It has the government that it really wants. The Israeli population. The Israeli population has the government that it wants, and it's the only other topic that occupies my consciousness more than American Jewry. American Jewry was just kind of declined. All right. Israel is, I think, headed for, is in the midst of a disastrous process, and I'm not sure how it turns out. And my parents are buried there. My only DNA is sitting in Tel Aviv, and I'll have grandchildren there. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna die there. My wife's gonna die there. That's my homeland, and it ain't doing well. This lady over here, then the lady back there.
Oh, Ari's telling us one more.
One more.
Yeah.
Talk fast.
Should we want to do lightning round? Can we just take all the questions
So-
and then maybe? So why don't? How about if we do that?
We'll
Is that
do
okay, Ari?
speed questioning.
So we're going to take all 3 questions and then maybe weigh in.
That's nicely done.
I'm Karen. I immigrated from Israel in 2004, so a year since then. And I'm raising 2 kids, and I send them to a congregational school, and I'm very concerned about how they're going to grow up. And there is among some of the Israeli community, people around my age, and there's a lot of us here, as you know.
Yes, I heard.
So it might be just a local issue, but I'm actually participating in a small program, and we discuss this all the time. And we're out of the 4 components of Jewish identity that you mentioned, God is definitely not in ours. So if somebody asked me 20 years ago that I would send my kids to Lewisburg, this proud Tel Aviv secular woman. So my question is to you: how do you, in your prophecy for what's going to happen to the Jewish identity here, is there room for this sort of secular Jewish identity that a lot of people from the Israeli community are talking about, how to form that identity and bring our kids into the community, integrate them into the Jewish community, but understand that the religious aspect is less.
Okay, so then there's.
I don't know if it's a question, but it's more of a comment. I was going through the neuropsychology according to your Jewish identity, and usually as we grow up, we constantly yearning to relive our childhood as adults. So I can see it in an Orthodox family, because you constantly have that yearning. Actually, as you experience life, it makes prints on your limbic system, and you constantly yearning to live those days, to live those moments. So to do that, probably the only solution to raise them in much more Orthodox families, so they have that yearning as they grow up, and they want to relive that. It's just the neuropsychology of human beings. That's who we are. You want to relive. That's why you go and try to find a woman that reminds you of your mother, usually.
You're not talking to me, are you?
Or maybe not. But that's the only way you can do it. To raise them in an environment that the smell, the sound of your voice, all those wonderful traditions make a print on your limbic system. And it's the pleasure system. It's basically what you want to relive over and over and over again. That's what you just said. You want to go back to Tel Aviv. That's your home. You want to go home. We constantly want to go home, like it or not. So that's my just.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll get back to that question. Is the third one?
Hi, Steve. You talked about demographics, and one of the demographic things that you talked about, factors that you talked about early but did not go back to, is the population explosion among the Orthodox, and what the ramifications of that is for the American Jewish community and indeed Jewish population worldwide, Israel too.
Right. So that was a comment. There are 2 questions here. On the Orthodox issue, our colleague Sergio Della Pergola estimates that the Orthodox, the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox population, children's population of Israel, which is now 20%, by the mid-century will be at 49%. There's huge, it's change. And in New York, of the 5 counties of New York, 5 boroughs, 74% of the Jewish children in those 5 counties are Orthodox. There are more Hasidic Orthodox Jewish children than there are conservative Jewish children, to give you just a sense of what's going on. So yes, I think that the if if you believe in projecting the future, and there's a problem, obviously, as you will know. We're going to see a larger fraction of the population is Orthodox. However, and this kind of gets back to the point you were making before, there's still going to be Orthodox dropouts, and with a larger Orthodox population, you'll have a lot more ex-Orthodox populating non-Orthodox precincts. So it'll be a very interesting phenomenon to see. When you get 35% of the population that's Orthodox, 20% of them leave, and there's all kinds of interesting population dynamics that'll be going on, and that population may go up in the next 50 years. So as for your hope for secular Jewish identity, it really depends upon some aspect of social cohesion, and so that if you could tell me, will there be large numbers of in-married Jewish friendships among secular Jews, among the Israelis, for example, as there are, then yes, we can see perpetuation. But there has to be a social basis to Jewish identity, and in this way I'm quasi-Marxist in that, or maybe Weberian. I see that the social cohesion permits all kinds of cultural epiphenomena, of which secular Jewish identity is one of them. And it could happen, provided you have the social cohesion. But because I see weakening social cohesion, it's hard for me to imagine a vibrant and long-lasting secular identity. But look, hey, anything's possible, but only certain things are likely, and that's not one of them. Thank you. Okay. Yeah.